Hey, let's do a quick crash course on how to use Marvelous Designer. Before we do anything, let's go up to Settings/Preferences, and let's set our view control to something you might be more familiar with if you're coming from Blender. Pause and copy this directly, or set it to something you're more familiar with. For me, I'm switching this over to the Maya preset, because that's what I'm familiar with. Let's take a quick look at the UI. From left to right, we have a library browser, where you can find all our assets. The 3D window, where our 3D scene is. The 2D pattern window, which will be where we'll be working with our garment patterns, and on the extreme right is our property windows, where we can adjust anything related to the scene, like our fabric types to simulation quality. Let's create an avatar. Avatars are the base models that you create garments for. Go to Avatar on the left, Female V2, and pick the AVT file here. This is the standard avatar that comes with Marvelous Designer. What's neat about them is that their proportions can be edited if we go up to Avatar and Avatar Editor. Here we can play with our avatar's measurements to approximate a real-life figure. For example, let's shorten her down to 165 centimeters. Of course, Marvelous Designer accepts FBX files as avatars if you'd like to clothe a custom character too. Now, let's give her a shirt. In our 2D pattern window, go up to here and select Polygon. Let's draw out a simple shirt by clicking around her silhouette. Something like this works. To make this symmetrical, let's right-click on it and select Symmetric Pattern. A flipped duplicate will appear, and blue outline tells us that these patterns are now linked. If we edit one by using the selection tool, Edit Pattern, we can see that any changes that we make are reflected on both copies. With the curvature tool, C, or accessible here, we can drag our edges to now turn them into curves. Let's create our back pieces now. With the Transform tool, we'll select both pieces and we'll duplicate these with a Ctrl-C and a Ctrl-V and place them off to the side here. You can adjust the rear neckline to be a bit higher like a real shirt. Something like that works. Let's see how this fits on our avatar. The pieces aren't nearly quite there in the 3D window, but we can use arrangement points to help us out here. By pressing Shift plus F, this brings up a grid of arrangement points around the avatar. Let's grab our front pieces and snap them to somewhere suitable, like here. We can repeat this with the back. Oops. Like so. The clipping isn't a big issue, but if you're bothered by it, we can adjust how these are placed around the arrangement points in our property editor, like so. Under Arrangement, you can adjust the positions of everything. So let's bring these up a bit. We can bring them slightly further from the model, or closer if we'd like. Same with these. Bring them up a bit. And maybe wrap them closer with position X. I'll set to bring them out a bit further, and there we go. Before we simulate anything, we need to sew these pieces together. Let's use the segment sewing tool, and on your keyboard or found up here. You'll just click on these edges to sew them together like so. And watch the changes reflect in our 3D window as well. Sew the sides up. And sew the back piece together. You might notice this small perpendicular mark on the sew line. This tells us the orientation of the sew. For example, if we flip the line like so, it would appear crossed like that. You can always select it with the Edit Sewing tool and reverse sewing. Let's sew up the last shoulder piece. Our sewing lines look good in a 3D window. Let's finally simulate. Press spacebar or go up to here. And there we have it. I would say that looks pretty good. Frankly speaking, I'm a bit lazy to draw sleeves, so we'll just switch over to the default shirt garment. Garment? T-shirt? No, and it'll add just fine. It's a bit too big for her, but we can resize the garment by selecting everything and resizing it like we would in an image editor by holding Shift to proportionally edit it. Select all the pieces and let's bring them down a bit and press space. Sleeve is a bit messed up, but we can drag and pull on them just like that. Now, I don't like this seam in the middle. By selecting the seam with edit pattern, and right click on it and select merge. This gets rid of the seam, but as you notice, it retains symmetrical editing, as denoted by this line in the middle. Let's do that again for the back piece. And now to add hems in a quick and lazy way. Let's select the neckline, right click, offset this internal line, and let's give it maybe about 15 millimeters. Let's repeat this for the back. And now we have these little red lines known as internal lines. You can select them, select cut and sew. And now we have separate hem pieces. Internal lines are a pretty great way to create things like pockets or just more edges to sew stuff to. Let's create a quick shirt pocket by drawing out a simple shape with the internal polygon line tool. Something like this maybe. And we can just shift this here so it's all nice and equal. Yep, there we go. Now we can select the shape, maybe adjust it slightly. And then we clone as a pattern, place it somewhere here. Now we can just simply sew this pocket onto the shirt like so, with our segment sewing tool. Let's bring this a bit closer to the shirt. And we have a functional pocket. Of course, we don't want it on both sides, so what we can do is remove the linked editing. Remove linked editing, and now we can get rid of the pocket on the other side. Now let's go ahead and turn this into a long sleeve shirt. Well, we can edit the sleeves in the 2D pattern window like so. Let's use the styleline editor instead. Up here, if we click the little scissors tool, this pops it onto its own floating window. We can now use the move and scale styleline tool like so. Select our garment, just drag this out a bit. And scale it up. That one's down. Scale it up a bit. Let's go further. Yeah, that's it. Let's just adjust this a bit. Now 2D pattern window. Let's bring the sleeve to the other side here. And let's simulate that. And we got huge puffy sleeves now. But we need to cuff them. Let's add a little scrunchie at the end of these sleeves. Select the lines, maybe offset. Now let's get rid of this small point first. Select the line, let's offset them by about 20 millimeters. Let's just cut and sew them as well. Now we can directly edit the length of edges by right-clicking on them and choosing change length. Let's bring these down to about 200 millimeters long. Change it to both so it becomes a symmetrical change. And now we can select these two edges and turn on elastic. It might be hard to see with the linked editing, but the two green outlines now mean that these edges are now elastic. Strength is pretty self-explanatory, while ratio determines in percentage how much the band will shrink to. You can see by the segment length here. Let's take a quick measurement of a wrist real quick. We go up here, we can select the basic circumference measure, select 2 points, draw a third one in the middle. That's about 14 centimeters. So let's turn our ratio down to maybe around 75. Now let's simulate. Here we go, big puffy sleeves. Now if we look closely though, the clothing resolution isn't all that high. Let's turn it up by selecting all our pieces and turning our particle distance down to around 5. If we resimulate now, the clothing's in much higher definition now. But it's also running quite slowly. 5 millimeters is typically good enough for a quote-unquote final resolution, while 10 to 20 millimeters are good working resolutions. Can speed up the speed of the simulation by going up here and changing this to fast GPU. Now that the simulation is running on our GPU, performance is much better. Let's play around with posing the model a little. While the sim is running, press Shift X to view our model's bones. We can now pose our model with ease. Let's bring our arm down a bit. Maybe fold this. Like so. You have to take care to move these bones slowly, because if you move them too fast, the clothing can clip through, and that's pretty annoying to fix. Turn off the X-ray. See our garment's perfectly posed now. While it runs a lot faster on the GPU, it also isn't the most accurate. Let's switch over to the fitting mode, where you'll notice it'll run very slowly, but give a more accurate result. A lot more detail maybe, nearly less clipping on very extreme parts. And also play around with some fabric types as well if you'd like to match the simulation to a certain fabric you're familiar with. If we select our fabric, you can see that there are some presets offered. Well, you can also download ZFab files. Let's pick a nice French terry that I have in my library. And we can select all our pieces and click this little down button here to assign the material to everything. It's been given a nice light texture, and its simulation properties will be slightly different as well. That's all you should need to know. Marveous Designer has a whole lot more features that I haven't covered, like folds and pressure, but the Marveous Designer documentation is quite robust, and it should be very easy to answer any question you might have. Have fun.